All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Efrat. Some of you know me from the Premed chat. And this is our second webinar where we'll be talking about building your application and your personal statement. I'm really excited that we have two amazing medical students with us, joining us, co-hosting this with me, Brenda Newman and Eliana Siegel, who are going to introduce themselves, share a little tidbit about their application, what their theme was. And then we'll start. Eliana, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Eliana. I'm a fourth-year medical student at Rutgers NJMS, which is the Rutgers campus in Newark. There are actually two Rutgers medical schools, for those of you who don't know, so it can get a little confusing. And I'm applying. I just had my last interview this week for pediatrics residencies. I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. Went to Columbia University for undergrad, majored in neuroscience, and I actually didn't take a gap year. I went straight through, which is why some of you heard I had to cram for my MCAT right after finals, which was not something I would recommend doing. And I'm trying to think if I really had a theme for my application. I didn't purposely have one. I really just tried to put as much of me into it because it's really hard to get to know a person in like 7 or 8 pieces of paper, which is what they have to begin with. So that was what I tried to do.
Thank you. Thanks. Brenda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Brenda Newman. I go to Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine at Northwell/Hofstra. I'm an MS2, so I'm fairly close to when I applied, but it's like, yeah, it was like 2 years ago. I also went straight from undergrad to medical school. I actually did something that people say are a little risky. I took my MCAT in August and I applied that cycle, which I could go in and elaborate the pros and cons of that.
I don't recommend people do that, but good for you that it worked.
It worked out fine. I think that what I realized and what I would say is like the most important about the application process is stay true to yourself. If something feels right for you, then you have to make decisions for yourself, and that's kind of what I did. And it'll show through your application. Like there's certain things that can't be right and can't be wrong, and everybody's going to tell you different things what to do, but you have to do what feels right for you. General themes in my application, I think my application was rather simple and not like anything really out of there, but I really try to emulate the characteristics that would make me a good physician. So yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. So I'll introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. A lot of you know me from the JOMA Premed WhatsApp chat. If you're not on it, please join. We'd love to have you. It's just a chat where when I have time, I post a daily application tip and we just kind of bounce things off each other that are really useful, I think, for pre-meds. A little bit about myself. My name is Efrat Bruck. I'm a fourth-year medical student at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. I was a non-traditional applicant. So I was a high school teacher before medical school for 8 years. And I also created MCAT prep videos for Khan Academy, all before medical school started. I have 2 children, ages 4 and 2, and I'm applying into anesthesiology. So the way we're gonna structure this session is I'm gonna give a brief presentation that should take 20, max 30 minutes, hopefully not more. Then we will take any questions you have about the presentation, and all 3 of us are going to answer the questions so that you get kind of multiple perspectives and not just what I think. And I want to add that, I don't know if for whoever was in the first session, it was very factual based. There were a lot of statistics and numbers. This session is a little bit more subjective, and a lot of at least what I'm going to say is just my opinion, right? So that's why I think it's really important to have other people answering the questions too. And just always remember that if you're not sure about something, get other opinions, right? Like what I say is really not the end all be all. So we'll take those questions, and then after that, we're going to answer questions that were submitted on our Google Doc. And again, all 3 of us are going to take turns answering so that you get a really, robust kind of response and you know, multiple perspectives so that you can choose what you feel comfortable with. Sound good? Cool. So I'm going to share my screen, and sorry, bear with me as I learn how to use a MacBook. Okay. So I'm just going to pull up our presentation. Gosh, I hope that I learn how to use a MacBook because it seems a little daunting now. Okay, I think I pulled up the presentation and I'm going to share my screen. And if you could all tell me it's being successful. Okay, do you see my screen? Do you see my screen? I feel like you don't.
No, we don't.
No? Okay. Okay, let me figure this out.
Efrat, somebody in the chat asked how you joined the WhatsApp group.
So, great question. You know what? At the end of this session, I'm going to put a link in. All right, so I'm having a little bit of technical trouble. Sorry, bear with me, please. What about now?
Perfect.
Oh, great. Okay. Okay, are we everybody see? Okay. All right, I already introduced myself. We can skip this slide. All right, so and do you all hear me well? Like, is everything calibrated? Okay, great. So application building. What are we going to talk about? So disclaimer, which I said, but I'll repeat it. A lot of this presentation is my opinion. It's an opinion based on experience and reviewing tons of applications and stuff, but still it's just an opinion. So get other opinions if you're unsure about anything. So we're going to talk about letters of recommendation, the disadvantage section of the AMCAS application, the activities section, your personal statement, secondary applications, and what the fee assistance program is. Okay, letters of recommendation. So there are two components to your letter of recommendation. There is the content of the letter, like what the person's writing about you, and then is who's writing the letter. So the most important thing is that the letter says, you know, specific and really good things about you. So try to ask people who know you really well and can write specific things about you. If you have a reputable person who can write you a letter, great. It's not that important, but it's definitely a plus. Make sure you leave an ample amount of time to get your letters. It takes people time to write them. Sometimes there are mistakes. So I would say at least 2-3 months before you need them. It's totally fine to ask for a letter even 6 months or a year in advance. Some schools require you to get a letter from a pre-med committee at your college. So if this is the case, make sure you make some sort of connection with the pre-med committee so that you're not like hustling at the last minute to get what you need. But as far as I understand, you still need individual letters. So what happens is that the committee writes a letter for you that's sort of a composite of what they think plus all the other letters. So basically you have to get the ball for this rolling a little bit early. Just don't leave it for the last minute. And if you're a non-traditional applicant, meaning you're someone who's done, you know, had a job before medical school or did other things before, you should consider getting a letter from your supervisor or employer to demonstrate prior success and skills that you bring to medicine. Okay, so some of you might know this, some of you might not, but the AMCAS application has a disadvantaged section where they ask you, do you think you're disadvantaged? And, you know, people like, I know a lot of people struggle with this, like they're not quite sure if to fill it out or not. So there aren't official rules about this section. Like nobody's going to tell you for sure what to do. What you should not do is fill it out just to get sympathy points or pity points. That's not why you're filling it out. I think, at least my understanding is that the purpose is to demonstrate distance traveled. So like you know, if you started off from a further spot, you know, then you get sort of bonus points. So that's really the purpose, is to show distance travel. So some examples would be financial. This is very like, you know, objective. Like when you were growing up, did your family get food stamps? At any point, you have to support yourself, you know, before you're 18, maybe even after you're 18. Education, did you go to a Hasidic yeshiva that didn't teach you any English? Did your high school have like zero college prep? Some places would even consider you educationally disadvantaged if you had no AP courses in your high school. Like I remember, I think it was East Virginia, some medical school in Virginia, like specifically said, like if your school didn't have AP courses, like check this box, like you're disadvantaged. If you're the first in your family to go to college, I think it's reasonable to put that in the disadvantaged section, or if you want, if you experience any sort of, you know, racial things that you feel like held you back. But please, please, if you're going to fill out this section, make sure that everything is true and that you're not trying to conjure up a story that doesn't exist, because nothing looks worse than filling out that box and a person being like, why did this person fill it out? Like they don't sound like they're disadvantaged. So that is the disadvantaged section. Okay, activity section. So what it's not supposed to be is a laundry list of activities that someone is reading. That's not the point of the section. The point is that, you know, you should look at every single entry as an opportunity to showcase yourself, right? You're presenting yourself to an admissions committee. Like Eliana said, you can't get to know somebody from a couple of pages. So this is where you really try to like build yourself up and you know, do your best to showcase yourself. Try to minimize repetition between the activities, right? Because like if you're repeating things and you just lost an opportunity to say something new, try to minimize repetition between activities and personal statement. There will of course be some overlap, right? Because you're the same person, but don't say the same thing over and over again. And here are some questions that you want to try to answer as you write about your activities. It's not every entry is going to answer every single question, right? But these are questions that should be like running through your head, like somewhere in your activities, these things should be addressed. And you can come up with your own, like along these lines, right? This is not like an exhaustive list. These are just some things that I came up with, right? That like, I think would be good to think about. So how did this experience shape you? What challenges did you encounter? How did you meet those challenges? How will the skills you've acquired make you a better doctor? How did this experience solidify your commitment to medicine? So that's an important one. They want to see that you're committed, not just that you like it and you're interested, but like, you know, you're committed. It's a commitment. How did this experience help you learn to deal with people from all walks of life? Diversity is a really big thing. They want to know that regardless of where you come from, you can deal with like anyone. And this is also an important one. What feedback were you given and how did you process it? So, you know, the way you become better at something is you get feedback, you process it, and you implement it. So that's another thing you want to kind of show. You want to show that you're the kind of person who can take feedback and become better at what you're doing. So I put an example for my activity section. Looking at this, I think I probably would have written it a little differently today, but this is what I wrote on my application. So I was a high school teacher before med school. And when you fill out your activities, they allow you to pick 3 that are more meaningful. And that's why you see I had like extra room at the bottom to fill where it says most meaningful experience remarks, right? So all the other sections you have just like a little bit like that top, and then, you know, for those meaningful ones you have extra. So I'm going to give you like a minute or 2 to skim through it, and then I'll read through it and I'll point out to you like how this paragraph, for example, answers some of the questions that I just said. So I'll just give you like a minute or 2 to read through it. And in the meantime, I'm going to try to learn all your names. Okay, I'm gonna start. I won't like read every last thing. I'll skim through and I'll just focus on the parts. So the Haragola was established in 1979 in response to the influx of Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union. Today, the student body. Okay, I'm going to skip. Notice that the last sentence where I very much enjoy the advanced training and education, interacting with a diverse pool of students, parents, and colleagues. You just throw it in there that, you know, you deal with that. I was able to deal with, you know, lots of different types of people, students, peers, colleagues, and nothing major, but, you know, it's in there. It took a lot of courage to give the model lesson that won me this job, but I learned that to grow, I must challenge my boundaries. So I'm telling them something that this taught me, right? This taught me that if you want to grow, you have to challenge your boundaries. Let's see. I'm going to skip to the bottom. Applying my critical thinking skills and understanding of peer pressure later helped me analyze the roots of my own actions, my own orthodox upbringing, thus teaching adolescents at Baragola also led me to become a student of human nature. So basically, even though this is not like a medicine thing, I'm trying to like show them what this experience did for me, as opposed to just saying that I taught. I'm telling them that, like, no, it helped me think about my own upbringing. It helped me develop my own critical thinking. You know, you just want to show them that you can take an experience and it can do something to you, even if it's not like perfectly related to medicine. All right, I'm going to go on to the next slide. My thing is clicking. What does that mean? Sorry. Okay, this is a second example. I'll give you another 2 minutes to read through it. Okay, so if you notice in the first paragraph, like I give very specific examples of what I did, because research is like a big word. What did you do? Did you sit at a computer and do PubMed searches? Did you, you know, so for me, it was wet lab, you know, so I like kind of explained what I did so people understand. Then if you look at the most meaningful remarks, I spend the first part explaining how this was a really meaningful experience for me because it was kind of a catalyst that, you know, propelled me into medicine, right? So I'm kind of zooming in on this experience, like this is what eventually led me to go into medicine. And then if you notice towards the bottom, I get very specific and I say, you know, I observed that the proximal convoluted tubule of the embryos was abnormally shortened. We're in the process of determining if this relates to proteinuria associated with iron deficiency. It's really important that if you do research, they have to know what you did, right? Like what part did you take in this whole thing, right? Because for example, this research project that I did, I mean, the paper had, I think 30 people on it. So to just like tell them, oh, my name is on a paper and this paper has like 30 people, like what did you do? So try to be as specific as you can when you're writing these activities. Okay, and then I put in a third example of something that I didn't pick as my most meaningful activity because at the time I actually didn't work for Khan Academy. I just won their competition, so I didn't like really know what's going to happen. But if you notice up here, if you've ever done work with an organization that sounds fancy, take advantage of that and make sure you put it on your application, right? Like I could have easily just forgotten that this competition thing was also with the AMC and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Don't forget that. Like every single, you know, fancy name that can be on your application, put it there. Remember, it's about showcasing yourself. So here's just an example of something, you know, simple that like, I just wrote what it was. I don't think it's anything too, you know, profound, but I wanted to make a point of, you know, that if you've worked with organizations that are well-known, make sure you put that on your application. Give you another minute for whoever's still reading. Oh, and at the end, you see, I kind of tied into my teaching, which is a good thing, right? Connections. Okay, so that's as far as activities go. The personal statement. Okay, so there isn't one right way to do it. There are like 1,000 ways to write a good personal statement, so don't get hung up on things you read on SDN and Reddit. So a great one pulls up your entire application, gives you lots of bonus points. An average one does nothing. Like it's a checkbox, but it doesn't like do anything to your application. A bad one sinks your application. Most people are not gonna have a bad personal statement. I mean, you have to say some pretty bad things for that. I feel like, you know, most of them are average. What you want to try to do is get into this category. You want to have a really good personal statement that the person reading it remembers. Okay, what's the purpose of your personal statement? The purpose is to pull together your application in a theme or a story to demonstrate things that wouldn't be obvious on other parts of your application, for better and for worse. So, you can pick up on really great things in someone's personal statement, but you can also pick up on like more subtle character traits, negative character traits. So that's also one reason for it. It gives you a chance to explain weak spots. It gives you a chance to talk about challenges, and it gives you a chance to talk about distance traveled, which admissions committees love. Topics you should avoid in your personal statement, please, please, please don't talk about religion, don't talk about politics, don't talk about anything controversial. Now, when I say don't talk about religion, this one can be tricky for us because most of us, we're coming from religious communities. And what I mean is, don't bring up your own personal observance life, or like arguments type of thing, right? But obviously, if religion is part of your story, it's fine to speak about it in an objective kind of factual way. So I think you understand what I'm saying. If any of you are unclear about the distinction, I'm happy to clarify it later. Things you should not do in your personal statement. I always like to start with a not, like multiple choice, where you first, process of elimination. First, the things you should not do. Okay. Do not speak badly of or in a condescending manner of other people, professions, or schools. You never know who's sitting behind that chair reading your application. Okay. For example, I was a nurse and I found it really boring and unstimulating. Maybe that person was once a nurse. The community I come from is closed-minded. Never say something like outright negative about anybody. Don't convey arrogance. I'm sure this is not a problem for anyone here, but just putting it there. For example, I know I can cure cancer if I just get into medical school. Don't repeat things that can be seen in other parts of your application. The application is organized in a certain way, and like you have to make sure everything is in its right place. So your personal statement is not a place to say things like my GPA is 3.9 because they'll see that somewhere else and you just wasted space. Don't be overly apologetic for weak spots. We're going to talk about this soon. Don't bring attention to anything that you do not want to discuss. Okay, anything you don't want to discuss, just don't say it. If you don't want to discuss that you have ADHD, don't put it on your personal statement. And things best reserved for a therapy session or TMI, that's just like a general thing you have to kind of figure out on your own, like, is this a little bit too much? And this can sometimes be tricky, but it's something to think about. Things you should do in your personal statement: pull together your story or theme, demonstrate your unique strengths and what you bring to the table. You should address any significant weak spots. I'll give examples soon. And you should speak about things that are not anywhere else on your application. So how to talk about life challenges in your personal statement. It's good too, and I think you should talk about life challenges, but there's a good way to do it, right? So first, you should be writing facts, not really judgmental observations. I know I said this before, but it should not sound like a therapy session. And it must be coming from a point of strength. It has to be a moving forward experience, meaning this challenge happened to me, but I moved forward and here's how. So for example, how did you overcome this challenge? What did you learn? How will the challenging experience make you a better doctor? You could talk about distance traveled, and then try to come up with concrete actions that you will take as a result of the challenge. I think in my personal statement, I had somewhere in there that one day I want to help Jewish women become physicians, and like at the time I wasn't doing that, but here I am, right? It happened. So like that was an example of a concrete action, right? You don't want it to just be like, I feel this, right? You want to give them a concrete example, like this is what I want to do. Okay. How to talk about weak spots in your application. So we're all human and it's fine to make mistakes, right? Admissions committees look for excellence, not perfection. They're human too. I mean, we could probably like philosophically debate the difference between the two, but for the sake of this talk, I think, perfection is like being terrified of making a mistake, whereas excellence is, accepting that we make mistakes, but you learn from it and you move forward. So the first thing I would say is don't draw attention to minor flaws, okay? You only want to address things that are real, right? If you took a leave of absence from college at any point, if you have a very low score somewhere, I mean, if you got a B, please don't apologize for that in your personal statement. It's a real waste, right? But if you have if you failed something, or if your MCAT score is really low, whatever it is, a really low score, you can explain. And if you've ever had disciplinary action taken, I cannot say I have experience with this. You should probably speak to someone maybe a little bit more experienced than me, but if that's something you need to explain, so that should be explained in your personal statement. And explain why it happened, what you learned, and how you improve going forward. And remember, don't apologize excessively, just explain it and move on. Some writing tips for your personal statement. It's nice. I think it's always nice to start with a story or anecdote that pulls in the writer. again, like it's my opinion, so take it or leave it. Show, don't tell. So instead of saying something like, I can take initiative, right? Like show how you did that. So for example, I organized an event for, you know, XYZ that was attended by hundreds of people, right? So you're showing instead of telling. Avoid cliches. Please don't say you want to be a doctor because you want to help people, right? That's too cliche. It doesn't tell them anything, you know, significant. Try to have good transitions, have many people look it over, and there really is no excuse to have grammar or usage errors because you can have people look it over. So, okay. The secondary application. So for those of you who weren't at the first webinar, or maybe you don't know, after you submit your AMCAS application, every school is going to send you their own application with their own special questions and why do you want to come to our school and the things that they care about. And it's very, very time consuming. So a couple of tips. You should create an Excel sheet to stay organized. This is a thing I did. I didn't read this anywhere, but I think it was really useful. When I got the secondaries, I was so overwhelmed. I'm like, there are 30 applications. Like I didn't know what to, or whatever it was. I didn't know what to do. So the first thing I did was I glanced at each one and I rated the difficulty from 1 to 5. So like 1 would be a really easy one that would take like 10 minutes to do, and 5 would be one that would take an hour to do. And I had a rating, and then based on that rating, I was able to order it. So I got like the easy ones out of the way, and then I saved the harder ones for later. You might be a different kind of person. Maybe you're the kind of person who likes to get the hard stuff done, but at least I had a sense of like what this thing was before I started. Save all your answers because there's lots of repetition, and just remember to save time because it's very time consuming. Okay, this is our last slide. So applying to medical school is expensive. I don't think you should worry about it because if you're a doctor making an average salary, you will probably make in 1 week what it costs to apply to medical school when you're attending. So please don't let this hold you back from applying to med school, please, please, please. But just to get a sense of the numbers, the MCAT is $320. The AMCAS application plus 1 school is $170. Each additional school is $41. It goes up every year. I don't know what it's going to be in a year or two. And then every school is going to ask you for a fee for their secondary application, which is around $100, but it can be more. So if you're applying to 15 schools, that's $2,500 just there. Now, we didn't even talk about interview costs, all the materials for MCAT prep, whatever other things. It can easily add up to $5,000 to apply to medical school. So there's something called a fee assistance program, which AMCAS has. If you're eligible, then it will be significantly cheaper to apply. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's much cheaper. And I'm pretty sure that most schools will waive that secondary application fee, that $100, will waive it if you qualify for this fee assistance program. So just the secondary applications, if you're applying to 20 schools, will save you $2,000. So please, 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 you know, if you think this is something you're eligible for, look into it and make sure you have all of your paperwork and documents lined up because it will save you a lot of money. And if you're not eligible, don't worry too much. Like I said, when you're attending, you should make, I hope, this much in a week about. So don't worry about it too much. Okay, that's all I have. Eliana and Brenda, I would love to hear if you have anything to add before we go on to questions.
I have a few things. One thing about the activity section is, first of all, everyone can hear me, right? Before I start.
Yes.
Okay. About the activity section, don't waste time describing generally what you're doing if it's a well-known activity. Like, for example, if you're shadowing, don't waste time saying, I followed around a doctor in this clinic, because everybody knows what shadowing is. I think it's much better use of your space if you can put in a little story or something that inspired you and why it was meaningful to you. Even if you don't put it as one of your most meaningful experiences, you can use that space to sort of give them a story, and it I think will then be more likely to get brought up in your interview if it's a story that the reader connects with. And as for the personal statement, when I wrote my first draft of my personal statement, I remember I showed it to someone and they said, what was the prompt of the essay? And I said, oh, I don't know. I think they just like want to know who I am. And he said, "Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure you're supposed to answer why you want to go into medicine." And I think that's really important because I hadn't done that. I sort of used it as like my college essay where I was just like writing a nice story about myself or a few stories. But I didn't say why I wanted to go into medicine. And that's very important to keep in mind. And I think, like Efrat mentioned, just saying I want to go into medicine because I want to help people and because I like science is not unique, because that's literally everybody that wants to go into medicine, I think. And then
yeah, like if you're
go
ahead. No, it's not important.
Okay. And another thing is that don't spend too much time trying to think of like, I need to find this one thing that is unique only to me that the readers have never, ever heard before, because chances are they've read so many applications over the years. Like, yes, everybody is unique and special in their own way, but the chances are that like you're not going to have this like crazy experience that nobody has ever experienced or heard before. I think it's more about the way you convey that experience and what it's taught you. You could experience the same thing as somebody else, but you can speak about it and write about it in a completely different way that becomes more captivating to your reader. And so don't worry about not like having such a special experience if you don't feel like you have one.
That was great. Thank you. Any thoughts, Brenda?
I'll pick up with the personal statement because I completely agree with what you said. I think that like sometimes people try to take what's like individual about them that might not be related to medicine and center the personal statement around it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but you don't really have to do that. You could have very typical experiences as a pre-med, volunteering in the hospital, and the way you describe it could really emulate like who you are in a way that would make the reader very interested in your personal statement and continue reading and impressed with it. I think also on that topic of personal statement, the question is why you want to go to medical school, and I think that that's important to answer and to make sure to answer it. But what they don't ask you, and you want to make sure that it's in your personal statement, maybe not directly but indirectly there, is why you would be a good doctor. And I think that that's something that you might forget, like some people might forget to answer because it's not the question asked, but at the end of the day, that's how you want to kind of sum up your whole application, which is what the personal statement is doing. It's packaging it, like Efrat said. As far as the activity section goes, there's no rules for it. So if something was important to you and you think you could write about it in a way that's meaningful and might add a characteristic about you that would be promising to a medical school, you could write about it. I wrote about modeling. I put that down as an activity I did, and I don't regret it. I got asked about it on interview, and it was interesting to talk about, but I didn't just write a description of modeling. I had to make sure at that point to write why it's meaningful and what it kind of taught me about myself. But that was just one fun thing I did. I didn't like, it wasn't like everything in your activities doesn't have to be something also like extraordinary. Like a lot of it was volunteering. My most meaningful experiences, the one that I checked off as meaningful, was like volunteering in the hospital. The fee assistance program is very time consuming. So if you're considering applying to it, you should allocate time to it. And it's very strict rules about who gets accepted. So don't be distraught if you fill out the application and you're not accepted to the fee assistance program, because I've heard things. As far as a disadvantage statement goes, I think that like Efrat summed it up like really well and like gave like very good description of it. I would just say that like if it's not like like also like going back to the rule, if it's not something you want to talk about, anything on your application is free ground for interview that you could be asked about it. So if you don't want to talk about it, don't put it in your application, not by the disadvantage statement, not by your personal statement, not by your activity section, because it's fair ground to be asked about it. But I think on top of that, I think that like things that are very like, that if you're really, really questioning if you should put it in the disadvantage statement, it might be a good sign that you shouldn't, because you don't want somebody questioning why you put something there. And the secondaries, I did kind of like, I thought there's some secondaries that don't have any essays, just do them first because it takes like 5 minutes. And then after the ones that have no essays, I prioritized based on the school I wanted to go into, but that was like based on like the schools that were most important to me. But I also felt that secondary is very late, so that's probably why I did it that way versus what was easier. And I think that's it.
I actually thought of something about secondaries. Sometimes you can actually look up the questions that the schools ask for the secondaries before they send them out. There are websites, if you just Google them, that will have like what they've asked in the past years. And if you have the time to just get started on like a few that you see pop up at a bunch of different schools that you're interested in, because a lot of them do overlap, and that could give yourself a chance to get started on them early, I would really recommend you do that, because they really are time consuming, like everybody else said.
Just keep in mind that sometimes they change them.
So. Right. That's why I said, like, if you see a few that overlap, you're more likely to catch one.
Yeah. It's like great. Thank you so much. Let's go to the questions. I guess, Eliana, you can, oh, thank you, Talia. I didn't see your message. I'm glad I figured it out. Okay, we'll start with what if you're first generation? Eliana, if you want to take that question.
Yeah, sure. First generation American. I think that would be circumstantial. Like if your family has like still has a strong educational background and like I'm just making something up here, but let's say your family was Israeli and then they all came here. I think that wouldn't necessarily be too much of something you would write in your disadvantage section. Unless you felt like it was very hard for you to grow up with parents who didn't understand American culture and you had to sort of like fit in and your friends didn't understand or things like that. So I would say it would depend more on your situation. I don't know if everyone else agrees with me. I personally left the disadvantaged section blank. I didn't want to put anything falsely in there, and I didn't feel like, thankfully, that I had anything that was holding me back from going into medicine.
Yeah, I feel like a good rule of thumb for the disadvantaged section is like stick to the facts. So I don't know about first generation, but if you're first generation and your family struggled financially because of it, because a lot of first generation families struggled financially, that's something you should put in, because like that's a factual thing. Like my family didn't have money, right? If you went to a really firm school that didn't provide you with a decent education, that's something you put in, like try to stick to facts, as you know. Yeah, and I would say like you want to err on the side of question, like Eliana said. You don't want it to look like you're trying to get pity points, but facts are facts. So if your family didn't have money growing up, that's a disadvantage. If you didn't have a typical education, that's a disadvantage. Anything racial or that's what I have to say. Do you have anything else to add, Brenda, about that question?
Yeah, I would also stick with like factual stuff. Like in general, if you're from a low socioeconomic status, that something's on your MCAT anyway. But if you are, then you should put it there, and the fact will be there because it's on your and they calculate it based on like the application. They ask you questions. I think that that you don't want somebody questioning why you put something there, and something factual, they can't question why you put it there. So I completely agree with that. I think that that there's room to put things like, oh, a first generation American in your personal statement if that was something big to you.
Yeah,
like
agree.
Like my husband, he's a second year resident, so he did the application process a while ago, and both his parents are from Iran, and he wrote about working at like helping out his dad when he was working, and how his dad was Iranian. So I think that like there's room for that in the personal statement. So, and if it's really meaningful to you and it really helps shape you, then you'll put it in the personal statement. But like, don't do anything too risky in the disadvantaged section, especially since there's not room even to explain anything. It's really small. They don't like very little words.
Okay. What kind of questions are on the secondaries? Things like, why do you want to come to our school? What are challenges you've overcome? I know Sinai has one, like, what's the toughest feedback you've ever gotten? Things like that. Do you have anything to add, Brenda or Liana?
Yeah, I know Rutgers has one. If you're not from New Jersey, why do you want to go to medical school in New Jersey? A lot of these things, the secondaries also, a question like that, they like to see that you're going to have a support system nearby or available to you, because medical school is hard, and they want to make sure you have family or friends or like a good like people to fall back onto if you end up struggling a little bit. But yeah, I think I'm trying to think what I answered for a lot of them because I don't remember the questions. Let me see if I can find some of them. Actually, I might have them saved on this old computer.
And
some of them have a question like, is there anything you want to tell us that's not elsewhere on your application? I remember like at least 5 schools had that type of question.
Yeah.
It's not like hard things, just like time consuming, you know?
Yeah. I have one school, like sometimes just schools will just say, is there anything else you want us to know? And don't leave that blank because it's more, they're giving you more room to talk about yourself.
Yeah, I think that like there's a range of questions. Some of them are interesting. I just remember like some of them were actually fun to kind of answer, and some of them were like the typical like, why do you want to go to our medical school? Or like, and the good thing is some of them repeat questions, and if it repeats a question that's like not specific to that school, you could just use the same answer. There's no reason you can't. So but you could, there's definitely like samples online, like people like have all the questions from like the prior year. So if you want to get an idea, you could definitely Google it. But it's really a range from like interesting to just like asking you like typical interview questions even.
Yeah, I actually have all my secondaries here with all the questions. Unfortunately, they're like 5 years old, so it might not be super helpful.
But by the time you've filled out the primary application, like you'll have a lot of this information like kind of in your head. It won't be difficult. It'll just be time consuming.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm going to speed through some of these questions because I want to get to the ones that were submitted on the Google Doc. So I'm going to just try to do this a little bit faster. Is the personal statement the only place where you talk about any weaknesses and you improve? Do secondary apps have a place? So some secondary apps have yes and some don't. So if it's something important, then bring it up in your personal statement because not every secondary application is going to give you that chance. Brenda and Ileana, feel free to like chime in if there's something important that I'm like missing or whatever. I just want us to get to the Google Doc. Would you what if you had to leave college for a bit to make money to continue your education? That's fine, just explain that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody understands that without money, you can't like go to college, you know, and if somebody doesn't understand that, you don't want to be in their school anyway. So I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of or embarrassed of. I think that people, most admissions committees will appreciate like taking responsibility because remember, like at least 50%, or I don't know, a very large percentage of people who go to medical school are children of doctors. So if you're not coming from such a home, or if you're coming from a home where you have to support yourself, you'll be viewed well. You'll be viewed as a mature, responsible adult. There's nothing to be ashamed of in that. Just explain it. And if you want like more detailed like guidance about that, you can contact me. Whatever. I'll put my email at the end for any of you who want to contact me. Anything to add, Liana, Brenda?
Yeah, people like talking about things that aren't medical, honestly. So if you have a job in the middle of college, that might come up a lot in your interviews.
There's specifically schools that like the fact that like you're mature and you had that aspect of your life already. And like for somebody like me who came straight from like college and like didn't know like gap years, they were kind of like, so how are you an adult type of thing? And that was a different thing that I had to struggle with. but also like 1 in 5 medical students, there was a study done, are children of, have 1 or 2 parents that are doctors. So if you have to get a job to pay for things, like people are understanding and you bring diversity into the class that way.
Yeah, it won't work against you. It shouldn't work against you in any way. Would you put the fact that your parents don't want to support through medical school in that section? So Evie, if you could clarify, when you say they don't want to support you, do you mean financially or just like in general, like emotionally, psychologically, because those are different, they would be a different answer. Oh, sorry, there was a direct message for me. Okay. Both, I guess. Okay, so them not wanting to support you financially is not something to put in the disadvantaged section, because a lot of students don't get financial support from their family. So it's nothing different. If your family's not supportive of your path, I would say that might be something to talk about in your personal statement, because that's like a challenge, right? If you don't have support and you have to do things on your own, that's definitely something you can talk about in your personal statement. But the financial aspect doesn't count, because a lot of people don't get help for medical school. Most people take out loans. So I hope does that answer your question?
Also, I would weir against, like, unless you could like show that you have a good support system, I wouldn't necessarily say that your parents aren't supporting you, because it could come to hurt you also, unless like it's a really big part of your story.
Right. Well, you could say that your parents aren't, but you have a different support system, right? As long as you make it clear that you have what it takes to get through med school.
Mm-hmm. And don't focus on it too much. Like you can say it and say, in spite of this, I've still done this and this and this to show that I still want to go into medicine, and it's something I'm still really passionate about. You know.
Bracha, I want to. Okay, this is that something that should be mentioned in the disadvantage section? So here's something I forgot to say. There's a part of the application where they ask you how you paid for college, the breakdown. How much of it was scholarships? How much of it was financial aid? How much of it did your parents contribute? How much of it did you contribute, right? So if you paid for college by yourself, they're going to see that in that section. So I don't know if it then makes sense to also put it in the disadvantage section. But I would say this is a gray one. You could probably go either way, because having to work through college sort of is a disadvantage for many people. Like, I don't know, I could see it going either way. Brenda, Liana?
I don't know, I'm torn. I feel like a lot of people pay for college or take out loans for college. So I don't know if they're going to question it.
Okay. Fair enough. Sorry, I think that takes care of the questions. You can all feel free to keep putting stuff in the chat, but I think we're going to go to just because it's getting close to 9. So I meant for this webinar to go to be an hour or an hour and a half. So we're going to go till 9:30, but if you have to go, feel free, it's fine. I'm going to pull up the Google Doc with all the questions that were submitted. So give me a moment to pull that up. And like I said, bear with me as I learn how to use a Mac. I hope this transfer is worth it. Did anybody do this? Go from PC to Mac? And like, was it worth it?
I love my Mac. But I love it. High school, so.
I went from Mac to PC, so I don't know. I did the opposite.
Oh.
I just feel like I have everything Apple. Like I have totally bought into the whole thing.
So expensive. So
it is so expensive, but I just love that I can like text and WhatsApp from my computer or my iPad. And
you need to see your bubbles, huh? Those texting bubbles.
Yes.
Okay, so I pulled the Google Doc, and Eliana and Brenda, you have it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I feel like what we're all going to try to answer. So again, you can get like different opinions. Some of these are great questions. I'm happy whoever wrote them. I don't know who, but some of these are really excellent questions. I'm happy that they were submitted. Okay, let's start with the first one. This is a great one. How much is too personal to share when it comes to one second. Medical history, that may be a huge part of my story path into deciding. I'm going to tackle this one because it was addressed partially in a meeting. I once heard someone talk about this. So I'll take this first and then Brenda and Ileana. So this is a tricky one. And I would say you have to really think about it. A couple of things to keep in mind. You're applying to medical school to become a doctor. You're not applying as a patient. That's number one, right? So it's not about getting pity points or sympathy. Number two to keep in mind is doctors are a little bit biased in the sense that they always see the worst cases of disease, right? Let's say, for example, somebody has IBD, like inflammatory bowel disease, right? There are lots of people with IBD and like it's mild enough that they don't even get care for it for many years, right? Those are not the people coming to doctors, right? The ones coming to doctors have it severe enough that they're seeking care. So doctors are a little bit subconsciously biased towards more severe cases of disease. And whoever's reading your application is probably a doctor, and that's something to keep in mind. With that being said, if you can spin it in a way where it's absolutely 100% clear that it won't get in the way of medical school, then maybe yes. If it can be interpreted in a way where it might get in the way of your medical school, then no, then don't talk about it. And I would add that, sorry, let me just look at my notes. So while it's completely and totally illegal to discriminate based on a disability as a result of a sickness or anything, the person reading your application might subconsciously just think like, oh, this applicant's like a liability. And I mean, how are you going to prove that that's what happened? And obviously you don't want to go down that route. So that's something to keep in mind. Even though it's illegal, it can still like happen, you know, even if the person doesn't mean to discriminate against you, right? So that's what I have to say about it. I would say, like, if you want to reach out to me personally and give me more details, I can give you a more tailored response, but this is something you have to think about. Ileana, Brenda, thoughts?
So I would say, like, also, like, if it's an experience that's like really like a big part of your story, you don't have to, you could write about the experience and not write about, like, let's say the disease you have. And if you are asked about it in an interview, which I think is a little bit inappropriate for somebody to ask you what your diagnosis is, then you could say that you're uncomfortable sharing, but be aware that you might be asked about it. Although, I mean, I personally wrote about a time that I was sick, but did not write what I was sick with. It was just more about the process of it. It wasn't the only part of my personal statement. I was asked by one interview about the diagnosis, and I think that it kind of threw me off, but one out of all the interviews I did. And it wasn't something that like could have gotten in the way of medical school, so I wasn't scared to write about it. But I hear, like, if you're gonna, you have to keep in mind the goal of your application, and as long as you're keeping that in mind, because also if you're gonna write about like a weak point in your life, you want to keep in mind about how that helped you get to where you are. And I think at the same point, the same thing with the disadvantage statement, you don't want to write something just to get pity points type of thing. I also like I left out the whole thing about cultural demands around me, even though it was a part of my story, just because it didn't fit well into my application in a way that it felt too personal. So I think it's give take, but do what feels right for you, but also like keep in mind that, again, anything you put in your personal statement could be used to you could be asked about it, and at the same time you could also be used as like a implicit bias type of thing.
I actually was diagnosed with a chronic disease in my first year of medical school and had to take 6 weeks off from school. And thankfully it was in the first year and I was able to make everything up over the summer, so I didn't have to take an official leave of absence. And I actually based my personal statement for residency applications on my whole experience with that. But I focused on how it shaped me and reinforced to me how I should be a better physician and how I know I will be a better physician because of it. And in that way, I think that you like both Efrat and Brenda said, it is risky. And when I showed my personal statement to my mentors at school, they were all like, oh, I don't know if this is a good idea. But I really felt that it was important to me. And I remember my mom actually said to me, for residency, for those of you who don't know, you get matched into one program. It's not like medical school where you get as many acceptances as you can and then you get to choose. It's a match. And so my mom said to me, it's called a match for a reason, and you want to be at a place that's going to support you if anything, because it's a chronic illness, does come up during the time of your residency. And I thought that was really powerful. I think that you have to be very careful with how you word it. Again, you don't want things to be, if you decide to include it, you don't want things to come off as, I went through such horrible things, and like, you don't want it to be a pity party, like has been said multiple times. You want to really show what it taught you, how it strengthened you, and then how it reinforced your love for medicine. And I think also, like Brenda was alluding to, I had described my symptoms enough that my mentor said, any doctor who's reading your personal statement is going to know what your diagnosis is. And if you don't outright mention it, it's going to seem like you're trying to hide something. And you have to be very willing to talk about anything that happened to you, because you're explicitly mentioning it. It is completely, even though usually medical circumstances are off the table, because you're mentioning it, it's completely on the table and they can ask you anything. And I felt like I was very comfortable with that. And so I did it. And honestly, it got brought up in probably 95% of my interviews. But thankfully, everybody received it really positively. So that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Thank you.
I think it's important to stay true to what you like, to your own story at the same time, which I think is great.
Right. It's something I would say, bounce off a few people and think about it, because it can go either way. But if you do talk about it, make sure you do it the right way. Okay. Should we move on to the next question? Mm-hmm. Okay. What's the best way to address a career shift from being a teacher to applying? I guess I'll take this one because that was me. It's not hard. I promise you. It's really easy. You just want to portray that you were a good teacher, and what you got from the experience, how it will make you a better doctor. Try to get a letter from one of your supervisors. I would say admissions committees love teachers. This is really not like a challenge. It's a plus. I don't see it as an issue at all. Again, just show the skills you got, how it will make you a better doctor, and how like it gives you an edge over, I guess, just like, what you bring to the table.
I think you were the most qualified to answer that question, so I don't have anything to add.
But it's a plus. There's nothing like negative about this. It's only a plus.
I think you're in a major. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like it's an advantage. Like you don't have to, don't worry about it. Like you should be happy that you have this wonderful thing to showcase on your application. You could talk about, if you want more personalized advice, you could reach out to me, but there's so much in medicine that's teaching, right? Like medicine has, right, like the teaching hierarchy, and you teach patients and you teach each other, and like medicine is full of teaching, so you'll be fine. Next question. Mm-hmm. Okay, do medical schools get concerned when hearing about psychiatric care, that prompted someone to apply to medical school and become a psychiatrist? It's a huge reason why I'm applying in part of my story, but I don't want it to affect their decision-making. I think we addressed this with the first question.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, that I wouldn't say that you're interested necessarily in a specific field when applying to medical school.
Oh, yeah.
They want you to be interested in medicine in general. That was advice I got, and I think it's important because you're interested in a field. If your interest in medicine is dependent on that one field, you don't know that much about that field before going into medicine. And I think that like a lot of people change their mind and you have to learn everything in medical school. So I think that you could say maybe that you have a specific interest, but don't be too attached to that in your application.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you. I wrote in my personal statement that I want to become a nephrologist because that's what I wanted to be at the time. But you're bringing up an important point. If you do write that you want to be something, I think it's fine, but you have to demonstrate, like Brenda said, that you're interested and engaged enough to learn about everything else in medicine too. Like that has to come across as well. But I don't see anything wrong with saying you want to become a particular type of doctor. Like I think it's fine. That ties into the theme of your application.
I hear that. I also, one secondary application question asked me what field I'm interested in specifically, but that was like one, and I remember being like, why are they asking me this? But I think that I ended up writing what field I'm interested in, but then said that I'm open-minded to switch and just showed that openness. So I think that as long as you're showing that you're open and interested in medicine in general.
Eliana, anything to add?
No, I think you guys covered it, and we covered the question, I think, really with the first one.
Yeah. Okay. Advice for writing descriptions for activities and how to prioritize which 15 activities to choose. Choose the 15 that make you look the best. Would be my, like something that's like, if you have 20 to choose from, so don't write the thing that like doesn't show anything, like pick the 15 that just showcase you the best. That's what I would say. But Eliana, anything?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's because I've been in med school for so long, but I can't imagine having so many more as a traditional applicant than 15 like meaningful.
When you're non-traditional, you have a lot.
Right, when you're non-traditional.
Like I had like
so it could be someone that was non-traditional asking that question. In that case, just try and find what was most meaningful to you that you think you can write passionately and well about and are willing to speak about on your interviews that you think someone might find interesting and that you can really speak about.
Lastly, I think the extent of time you spent in activity is also important. It shows commitment. So like something you did for like 2 days over like 2 months, 2 months shows a little bit more like commitment, and it should be valued a little bit more. But also like in general, even if you did something, it was like a 1-day event that you planned for 2 weeks, but it was really meaningful to you, it should be included also.
Okay. How can I combine similar experiences in one activity section? For example, shadowed multiple doctors, taught at multiple schools, etc. So you can combine, but I think this goes to the previous question. You want to do it in a way where you're showcasing yourself, picking the things like Brenda said are most meaningful to you, things you're passionate about. But you can like list things like there's no rule that says you can't. Like I think in my thing for like I used one entry to list like awards that I got and like honors types of things. So like that, such an entry, like I just made a list, right? Like I got this award, I got that award. I don't know, I was an honors, whatever it was, I was on the dean's list, and that was like one entry. But I think you can do it for other things too. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I only did it for awards also, but I think that's a general consensus of what everybody does for scholarship awards and like dean's list. You just list it and you like put the title as honors and awards. But I don't know how you would do it for anything else. I didn't really join other things together.
I feel like what you could do is say, while I shadowed at multiple doctor's offices, maybe even in multiple specialties, I found this one to be the most meaningful or the most interesting, and here's why.
Yeah, and again, like remember what the goal is when you're writing this. The goal is to demonstrate like your abilities, your uniqueness, your skills. So however you put it together, just make sure that comes across, right? Like it might be better to write one thing, but really write about it, that like sometimes quality over quantity. So you have to weigh all these things and just make sure that you accomplish your goal, which is to make yourself look good. Okay, with COVID, my clinical experiences are different than they usually would be, i.e. not in person. How does that impact the primary application, and how do I explain what or why I did? So I think, you know, you're all in the same boat as the other applicants, right? The other applicants are also limited by COVID. And I don't know about other schools, but I think at Sinai, there is a specific question that they ask you, like, how has COVID impacted you right now or your application? Like there's a question, so you can address it in that question. I'm sure other schools are doing that too, but I wouldn't worry about too much about something like you're all in the same boat type of thing. So I don't think it should be too much of an issue. Just explain yourself. But
yeah, I think especially in the medical field, people are going to be completely understanding of changes that happen because of COVID. I mean, I know for me and Efrat applying to residencies now, all of our, Efrat has a special circumstance, but all of our interviews are virtual. One of my like huge rotations in third year, I haven't even done yet because of COVID. And everyone, was just, when all of like the changes were happening, everyone was just saying everyone's going to be really understanding because we are living in unprecedented times and we've all had to adapt to them. And I think people are just going to understand.
Yeah, I think same. I have nothing to add. They're just going to be understanding and everybody's in the same boat.
Okay. There's another question. I guess this came in today because I didn't see it earlier. How many hours is enough for each category? So there's no like rule book about hours you need for these activities. It's just self-understood that like by the time you're applying, you'll have some sort of collection, you know, to present. I can't answer that question. I was a very non-traditional, so I had like tons to write. It wasn't an issue for me, but like, yeah, I can see if you're traditional, like, and you're busy, like you don't have a lot of time to build a repertoire. I don't know, maybe Eliana or Brenda have a better answer than me.
Yeah, I've actually seen something that the hours, it's very easy for whoever is reading your application to calculate like literally how many hours, if you add everything up, how many hours per week you're spending on something. And if you're a full-time student, saying that you're spending 40 plus hours on activities is probably not realistic, and that will be very easy for them to see. So really just be realistic with your hours. If you spent 5 hours a day over 3 months, you have to, because that's what you did for the summer, just be realistic about it. Don't put like thousands upon thousands of hours, unless like Efrat, you were teaching for a few years and you actually have spent thousands upon thousands of hours doing something.
Yeah, make sure everything you write is like completely true, obviously.
Yeah, I logged my volunteer hours, so when they asked me how many hours, it was the easiest thing to do. But like when I planned an event, how would I like estimate how many hours went into that? So it was just I just did the kind of the math, like and figured it out. But I don't think you have to have a certain amount of hours to put an activity down. Like I just skimmed through my own application, and I think the activity that had the least amount of hours had like 20 hours invested into it, and but it was meaningful. I don't even know what it was. Oh, I was an event planner for Holocaust Remembrance Day, so I think that it was meaningful. I had what to write about it, so.
Okay. We have a couple of new questions in the chat I'll go to. Would it be better to stick to one job throughout pre-med or try a bunch? I'm going to say try to find things that you like, that drive you, that you're passionate about, instead of just checking boxes. So that should drive you, right? Like that should lead you. Brenda, Eliana?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it can, if you're jumping around from thing to thing every month, it can look like you're not able to commit to something, and that might come off not so well. If you can feel like you can do 2 or 3 and spend a significant amount of time at each of them, and you really feel, every year. Are you saying pre-med as in college? And you would be working on the side as well? I guess that's fine if you switch jobs every year. I don't think that would be terrible. I think, is this like a job that you're earning money at?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's fine. I mean, personally.
Yeah, I think like even for extracurricular, you wanna, the thing is the more time you spend in something, the more meaningful experiences you'll have with it. And as you could see with the application, like there's not that much room. I mean, 15 activities is a lot, but you're not gonna write everything in your personal statement. But you definitely want to make sure you're doing something you enjoy. But I think a year is a very significant amount of time that you will develop like experiences that you could write about, and that will probably like develop you into a person, that a better person that would be a better doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Also, what if you're not a good writer? That's fine. You're applying to medical school, not writing school, not a PhD in English.
I hate writing.
Yeah, it's totally fine. You're going to get help. I mean, you have to be the one writing it, but people are going to help you. People will read it over and they'll give you ideas. And you'll get all your Itzagabers, if you know what that means. You know, you'll get lots of, you know, cooks in your pot, and it's fine. You'll just get help doing it.
Yeah, I sent my personal statement to like anybody that would, like any of my friends that would read it. I didn't have any physicians in my family to read it, but like anybody that was willing to give me advice. And what I did was I always kept the original copy. So I got to choose what made sense for me to edit versus what didn't make sense to me. You should be the final decision maker, but you could get advice from a whole bunch of people. And I don't consider myself to be an extremely good writer. And I think that it worked out fine for me. It'll work out fine for you. Some people hire people to edit their personal statements. I didn't really do that. I know people that do that, but that's also an option always.
Yeah. I also do not consider myself a good writer at all. I don't even think my personal statement was honestly that amazing. But at the end of the day, show it to everybody that will read it, but it needs to still sound like you. You need to be able to read through it and say, I wrote this, and this is something that I could write again.
Right, that's really important. I also had like so many people write it, and so many people giving me tips and advice, and like some of their advice I just like rejected. I'm like, I'm sorry, it just didn't feel right. It needs to be you. But as far as like grammar and usage, that like there's no reason to have any sort of mistakes, because that's very easily correctable. So just have people read it over. And I think, you know, in some schools, like the pre-med committee like will do this for you or something, like there's support in schools for this. I'm pretty sure someone at my pre-med committee at Turo, like somebody helped me with that. Lots of people, but like you should be able to get support from your school wherever you are for this.
Yeah, I went to Brooklyn College. The pre-med advisor there, I think I went to him like at least 3 or 4 times with my application, and he helped me edit it, definitely fix the grammar. And there's a lot of people to help out with these type of things. So you should reach out to your pre-med office.
Yeah, and don't feel bad about it or like you're being a burden. I mean, they get paid for this, right? It's their job. You're paying tuition. So, you know, get your tuition's worth and get all the help you can get.
They take pride in it. When you're done it, they're happy that like your application went in, and they take pride in helping you in this process.
Yeah. And you can always, I mean, at the end of this talk, I'll put my email. You can always reach out, you know, directly to any of us here at JOMA. You know, we're here to help too. If we're busy, then, you know, maybe we'll shuffle you to someone else or whatever, you know, at the time. But, you know, lots of people are willing to help with this. Okay, how do you address something that got short due to COVID? Well, you tell them, right? Like in whatever section it is, you can explain. And like was mentioned before, medical schools should hopefully be pretty understanding about this.
Yeah, the activity section also has a spot where, in addition to the amount of hours that you spend, you write like the month and year that you participated in that activity. And if someone sees March 2020 through the present time, they're going to know that things are affected by COVID.
Sorry, I'm just putting my email in the chat for those of you who, until I get a JOMA email, I don't know. I don't forget.
And I'll put my phone number if anybody has like faster questions that they want answered. Because I check that much more often than my email.
Any other questions? Anyone before we wrap up? And I guess while we're here, I'll try to get the WhatsApp link for those of you who want to join our WhatsApp and get spammed by me. I'm just kidding. Okay, see if I can get it.
Also,
you put some
questions that,
sorry, go ahead.
If you have questions that don't specifically apply to this seminar, but just in general have to do with med school, application process, interviewing, feel free to ask. I know I didn't have someone that I felt like I could reach out to during the whole process and would have been helpful.
Yeah, definitely reach out. And the Premed chat is a great resource because I think there are like close to 100 people, a lot, not all of them, or 70, I forgot. Not everyone is a lot, most are pre-meds, but we also have like people like us, medical students and attending doctors, and everybody's really willing to help. So, okay, I found the link. Give me a second.
Okay, there's also another question. Do you put STEM as year abroad in activities? I personally didn't. I didn't put anything from before college. In my activity section, there were some schools in the secondary applications that asked if you took a gap year either before or after college, and then to expound upon it there. And sometimes I did talk about Israel, but in a less religious way and in a more of the cultural, experiential, what I learned from it way. I didn't spend too much time saying I learned about the Parsha and Hilchos Nida and cover and hair cover and all that, you know.
And marry a learning boy, you forgot that one. I mean, I don't know which seminar you went to, but.
I didn't go to seminary, so I have no answer.
Okay.
Legit.
Oh, that's so
yeah. So, sorry, I'm just gonna say that, like, as I said in our first webinar, you're gonna have to put every institution that you attended after high school. So like they'll see your seminary transcript. So then I don't know if it makes sense to put it like in your activities, right? Because it's like part of your education sort of, but it's really up to you. If that year was really formative or whatever, then yeah, why not? You know, talk about it. If you have like a million other things to talk about, it's not that important to you, so leave it out. Like they'll see that you went.
Bless you.
Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Anybody who didn't peek to say hello wants to show a face? I just feel like I need to put names to faces. Okay, so you all have the link, I hope, the chat, you have our emails. Okay, if any other questions, if not, we'll wrap up. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you everyone who came. This was lots of fun. Hope to see you on the pre-med chat. Thank you, Eliana and Brenda, for co-hosting with me. Thanks for putting up with my technical ineptitude, which I hope will get better as I learn to use a Mac.
And thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.